So you can see on the screen, we are here to talk about configuring a failover directory, but first we sort of have to understand what the directory is, and why we need to have a failover. But just to test the questions section and see if I can have some participation at least, if you look right there in the middle, failover, I was just curious if folks understood sort of, like in a one-word reason, why do you need a failover? Now we have failover archivers as well, right? There's in addition to just having a failover directory, but I was curious if somebody could give me one word in that question section, and again, this will prove that you can hear my voice, that will tell us why we need a failover anything. What is the reason for having a failover? Just curious if somebody is awake. That's it, Nick. Perfect. That's the one word. You spelled it out in an entire sentence, but redundancy, that's what I was looking for. That's the reason we have failovers, because, surveillance systems are not toasters, right? We don't have to have a failover toaster in my kitchen, because if my toaster fails, I just eat bread that's a little bit softer, right? I mean, this is a surveillance system, so it's very important to have redundancy, both at the video side for failover archivers, which we're not covering here today, but we'll sort of briefly mention as we look at the installation of the failover directory, and of course the entire system itself, and that is what we're getting at. So let's take a look at our next screen. And like I mentioned, it's important to understand what a directory is, and in our system it's the brains, right? If you look over on the right-hand side, you can see those three little silver discs. These are the mandatory components of a surveillance system in Latitude. Got to have all three of them. If you don't have a whole system. Now, I'll say that with a little asterisk, though, because the reason for having failover, of course, is to replace, or to if something dies, we want another copy of itself to take over and say, okay, I'm now that thing. However, there is an important thing to note about our directory, and that is that even though it is the central brains of our system, the system itself still functions fine, even if the directory goes down. It's not a single point of failure, which is kind of good. Now, there are some things to talk about, about what the directory does and the things that you may not be able to do while the directory is offline. And again, that's the reason for having failover, so you don't have an offline directory. But still, I do want to point out the directory is still pretty resilient, and even without it working, the system information basically is cached to your local machine. So what I'm getting at here is I'm expanding all this, and this is one of the slides we use in our Latitude certification classes. I wanted to get down to this part right here where it shows what it supplies, right? It's the system administration and configuration. It's the system, it's the brains. In any entity, there's only one brain, right? So when you have a failover directory, it's not functioning while the regular directory is. That's the sort of gist of it, right? And we have a hierarchical structure, or a tiering structure basically, that we set up to, when the original directory goes down, the failover directory takes over. And that's what FOD is talking about right up at the top right here. It is supported, and that's what we're here to talk about today. Just a couple of other things. Of course, it does have a limit now, a higher limit, much higher than it used to be, of 10,000 cameras per directory. We have some very large customers. They are pushing us to continuously increase those numbers, and it's good for everybody, because then all of our other customers are able to grow into the system as well, and we can handle anything they can throw at us. But basically the directory maintains as you see there in the fourth bullet point, a database of all system configuration settings. So of course that's very important. It is the brain, like I said, of the entire system. Now, if you look on the right, again, those three disks that are right there, the middle one is the archiver. Without an archiver, you can't record video, so of course it can't be an entire system. But the bottom one is important to understand what it does as well, and we'll talk about that briefly, and that is the EDB. Which you can see down there, and again, that's coming up in the next slide. But one of the most important things that the directory does, here I'll make it flash here red for you. Oops, it's supposed to go to the next one. Oh, I see my slide directory. I forgot it's going to do this, but this is what I was trying to get at. That's the most important thing, right? It maintains a database of all system configuration settings. Now, if you look below there, again, we talked about the top little indent, but it also is what authenticates any user when they log into the system. So log in, log out is controlled by the directory. Now, if you're already logged into the system, this is what I was getting at before, no worries then. Well, some worries, right? You can see that third one right there. You don't have any alarms because that's also controlled by the directory. But if you're already logged into the system, into Control Center, Admin Center or something, mainly Control Center is what we're talking about, but all of your system settings that are attached to your profile are then cached, C-A-C-H-E-D, to your local machine. So the directory being offline does not prevent you from doing work once you've logged in. However, because it does authenticate. No new users are able to log into the system until the directory comes back up again. So this EDB that we were looking at right down here, and the reason I mentioned it, it's one of the three main components of the Latitude system. Archiver records, directory controls everything, but the EDB, of course we use the SQL Express. The EDB itself controls a few things as well and really helps the directory in its job. And I like this term that we use in our Latitude classes. It is basically the central communications software switch, right? It's think of what a normal switch does. It directs things around based on commands from other entities, and in this instance it's commands from the directory. So when the directory needs something done, it utilizes the EDB to get that stuff done. Examples of some of these things that are processed by the EDB, of course, are, notice they sort of go hand in hand with what we talked about the directory does. It logs you in and logs you out. So even though the directory controls everything and it is the brain, just like in our body, right? The brain controls the feet to move forward when you want to walk or run. And it's kind of like the same thing, right? The brains are the directory, and the sort of synapses that let us pass these messages down to the other things are basically what the EDB controls in the system. So the reason I'm even bringing this up is because if you're going to install a failover directory, most often you're also going to install a secondary EDB on that same device, because most of the time, the directory service itself may go down, but most of the time it's going to be a communication failure between devices. And if your directory goes down, your EDB is usually installed on the same machine. Generally, it doesn't have to be, but it usually is. Most likely you've lost your EDB as well. So when the failover directory comes up, you want the secondary EDB to sort of do the same thing that the primary EDB does for the primary directory. All right. Now with that said, secondary EDB is supported. This is what we were just talking about, normally installed with the failover directory. I got ahead of myself a little bit. It enhances the system scalability and robustness. And the good thing about, the big thing about the EDB, other than what it sort of does to support the directory's operations, is it performs or contains the database where our audit trail is located at. And that's a very important thing, especially on the service side. When we're going back and trying to figure out what happened, who did it, when they did it. The audit trail is your friend, right? That is what gives us all this information. So with that said, now it's just time to go to the live demo. Now, you can't see it in the GoToMeeting software or GoToWebinar software, but I actually have connections to two different machines here. One is my primary directory. So that's what we're going to do first. Is I'm going to go to my attendee list right here, and I am going to make the primary system the presenter here. Hold on one second. All right, now if I use my mouse on this screen to show my screen, now you're actually looking at the primary system. You can see Admin Center and Control Center, and I left the network icon here open, or the network command prompt open, so you can see the address. This one is 0.17 is my primary system. So here is my primary system. Actually, let me close, oops, sorry. The primary system itself, and you can see right here, I have my archiver, my directory. Let's go take a look at this one. So here's our directory. It's just been up, right? I've uninstalled and reinstalled this about 15 times over the last 2 days trying to prepare for this, but I actually had to reinstall it again right before this, of course, so I can then add the failover directory. So you can see here's my general tab. Failover tab here is listed, and if you look down here, it is enabled and set at a failover priority of 100. Your primary directory is always going to be set to 100. This is the highest priority, unlike some of our other priority slider bars here, like for PDZ, control, and things like that, where it actually say that 100 is low and a little parentheses after this. In the failover server, the 100 is the highest priority. It is the primary the primary directory server. And generally what we'll do then when we add our failover directory here is we're going to set the failover directory device itself at 99, which will be the one lower priority. So when this one fails, 99 takes over. And because of this tiered or prioritized structure, we can have as many failover directories as we want, right? I mean, well, 100 is an arbitrary number. I can actually, I can't go above that. So actually there is a limit. I just lied. You can only have 99 failover directories. Now, of course, I'm just being facetious, but what I'm getting at is you can have a secondary failover directory and set that one to 98 and go down accordingly. All right, and as we talked about before, the database on the primary directory itself is, the name of it is Portal 5. You don't need to know that, but this is the brains of the system, right? This is the entire system settings. Every time you make a change in Admin Center, you are updating this database. So, all right, we're going to go back to our general. We'll go to our failover tab just to make sure that it is enabled and is ready to go. But to add any service, I don't remember what I changed, but we'll save this settings. To change any of the, or add any of our server services to our system. I talk about this in our Latitude class a lot. When you go to install, it doesn't really matter what you install initially other than those three primary things that we talked about, the directory, the archiver, and the EDB, because you can always come back in here afterwards. Like if I didn't install a transcoder, for instance, or a gateway, notice I didn't install a gateway. I could easily just come here to System in our physical view, and I could add any of those individual server services that I wanted to. And of course, here we're here today to talk about adding a failover directory, so let's go ahead and do that. And as you can see, it's come up here, and let's just call it what it is, a failover. Doesn't really need directory in its name. That's a little redundant, right? But it does need a network address. And as we just saw, well, actually, we didn't see yet. We'll stop right here for a second, because what I need to show is I'm going to make my other machine the presenter this time. Let's change presenter over to the failover directory server. Hold on one second. You can see here, and it's important to know this too. I'm glad I stopped there, got ahead of myself. All right, this machine's a little bit slower, I've noticed, so I'll try to go slow in my hand movements. But basically what you can see here is I've installed the server services only to act as the failover directory. So what I did was when I came to this machine, I ran the executable that extracted all of the different things, and then I actually chose server, just like I normally would do for any failover or any archiver or any server, right, that's in the system, and I only installed the directory itself. Well, you can choose, right? You can choose directory and archiver and EDB, and that's fine, right? Because our failover directory can also be a failover archiver if that's what you need as well. So I could have chosen that, but I didn't. I chose the directory itself, and the directory comes with the EDB and the gateway and the transcoder by default. So you can see this is not a full-blown setup. I haven't even updated the branding yet, right? This is still our old DVTEL branding because all I'm running are server services on this machine at the moment. And as you can see, its IP address right here is 18 or 0.18. So I did want to show that first. Let's go ahead and change back now to the primary directory and show my screen here again. All right, that should have changed it back now. So on the primary directory itself, on the primary system. Now it's one important thing also to notice, and I skipped over it basically because I already had to have that service installed, otherwise we'd have been here for an extra 10 minutes. But what happens is when you install only the primary directory itself and the EDB and the transcoder and gateway that come with it, when it comes down to the installation, it installs everything like it normally does in any install. It looks the same, and when it gets done, it actually pops up the little message asking if you want to install Admin Center, Open Admin Center, and it is checked by default. So if you just hit OK, it's going to launch Admin Center on that on the failover machine, and that's what you do not want. There's a big caveat about that. As a matter of fact, what we'll do here is let's just go back. I'll make my original machine the presenter so I can pull up a document and show you what I'm talking about instead of just rambling on. Now I still have my live demo up, so let's go ahead and close that. Now what I'm talking about is this right here. Initially, this is from an older document, right? When you go and you launch your executable package, you choose the server installation right here, and then you come down here, and this is what I was referring to, the directory comes with remote and web services. If I wanted it to be an archiver, I would simply choose this one up here. But in this case, I chose this one. You can see those are the things that I had running on that 0.18 failover machine. And then you come down here and then you choose, and this is what I was referring to. If I wanted it to be an archiver as well, I could simply choose this one instead of the one that I chose. And this is what I was getting at right here. Very important to understand. When this comes up, if you actually leave this checked and launch Admin Center on the failover directory machine, it now thinks that that failover is part of this federation, and you'll never be able to add it to the other system. So this is one of the most important things. That's why it's highlighted here. It even says right up in here, uncheck the box and finish. If Admin Center is started from this machine, it'll think it's a separate federation and cannot be added to the primary directory. I wanted to point that out. All right, so let's go back again. I'm going to make my primary machine the presenter. And I'm showing my screen again now. So we're back again looking at the new machine that we've added simply because we're on that screen right now. We need to give it a network address. And as we saw, this is 192.168.0.18, right? This machine I'm on here is 17 with the primary system. And I'm going to come over here and just make sure that my failover tab is enabled And as I mentioned, that the new failover directory is set at a lower priority than the 100 that the primary one is. So this is all it is. It really is a very easy configuration. I'm going to come back now and that looks good. Go back to my General tab, and all I have to do then is hit Save. And there she is. Now, if I come back to my initial, now it does take a little while to show up. Now this is, and because this is in the system, it's been added, right? We haven't configured it yet because just like the original or the primary directory, we have to license the failover directory. So what we do to get our licensing, we go to our system settings in our sidebar on the left, and then we click on license. And as you can see right down here, here's my training machine. Here's 18, and is licensed? No, it's not. Oh, there it is. Now it's actually telling us what that machine ID is, which is, I guess I don't know if I can copy it from there, but basically I've got it in front of me and written down. So what you do then is you have to go to the license portal and actually download the license for that machine ID, because that's how we have it set up. So I've got that one right there. It ends in the 475. I've got it written down in front of me. So what you do is you click on Install License, and you would go to the licensing website. And again, it tells you the machine ID right here. So this is really all we would need to do is copy and paste this. And then when we go to our licensing website, let's sign back in again. You'll be able to see the licensing steps then once we are logged in. All right, I simply choose 7, which is the one we're looking at, and I view details. Again, this is probably the tougher process or the longer process than anything else, is actually licensing it. Because the configuration, you simply, launch the server services part that I talked about on the secondary machine. Let's paste it in there. And activate. There we go. That's what I was looking for before. And then we download that license file. Browse. Downloads. That's the one we just created. Install license. Boom, you can see. Now, it is going to take a second or two for this to say true. I've seen it take up to 2 or 3 minutes. So there's really no reason to sit here and install and wait for that to occur. And it's actually sometimes you might have to click away and then come back to the screen to actually see it. It's even in the release notes that says that. And it's true. I've seen it a couple of times. Now, we talked about already in our previous slide presentation that not only do we need a failover or directory, but if we're going to do a failover directory, in some situations, like I mentioned, you might not. But in really critical applications, that's when failover really comes up to play. So in a situation like this, if we have a failover directory, we're also probably going to want to add, as I mentioned already, a secondary EDB. Again, very simple to do. We know where it's at because it's on the same machine as the other one. Here's the new EDB. I'll just call this the secondary EDB. Come down to the network address. We know that's on 0.18 because it's the same as our failover directory, 0.18, and hit save. And that's it. Basically, the configuration is sound. Now I'd have to bring down my directory for those to take over, but let's go ahead and check and see if we have any questions in the questions section. Nope. The last thing that was in there was the redundancy comments that I was asking for in the beginning. Keep in mind, this has been recorded, so we can always be able to see it later on. And because you registered and came to this webinar, and actually even if you didn't come to the webinar, just the fact that you registered indicates that you are going to get an email with a link to the recorded webinar. So if you see it later on, or if a question pops into your head about something that you saw here, or if you're actually seeing this later on because you were not here attending today's webinar, please send me an email, marty.major@flir.com. That's marty.major@flir.com. We're doing as many of these types of webinars as we can. This one came as a request from someone in the field. They said, we don't do this too often. Let's go ahead and do a webinar on it. So we did. We need some input from folks out there in the field, our VARs, our partners, our salespeople, our customers, whoever it is that needs information on how to do some of these functions, whether it's in Latitude itself, whether it's thermal, analytics, cameras, anything at all. Just let us know. Send us an email. And with that said, I don't like to delay your day any longer, so I appreciate everybody coming, and I hope to see you on the next one. This one is done. Thanks a lot.